Hello everyone, this is Space Café Podcast, and I am Marcus. I have a story for you, my friends. So during the catastrophic Apollo 13 mission on April 13, 1970, two explosions took out the main power system in the lunar module, forcing the astronauts to improvise. As we know today, they overcame the challenges they faced. I'm reading now from a letter that the Apollo 13 crew issued in the days following their successful and miraculous return, showing a little bit of insight into the small things that saved lives. As you know, due to the explosions, we were forced to ration our electrical power and water. With regard to the former, we never turned on the lights in the spacecraft after the accident. As a result, your pen lights served as our means of seeing to do the job during the many hours of darkness when the sunlight was not coming through the windows. And you know what? We never wore out even one set of those pen light batteries during the entire trip. In fact, they still illuminate today. A guiding light now and then is useful no matter how small or how big. Some call my guest today a guiding light in all of this that's out there. Well, perhaps not the entire universe, but at least our small, feeble human share of it. The space industry is vast and becoming ever more obscure in its literal and not so literal sense. A pen light can come in handy in all of this. Please welcome my guest of this episode with me, Carissa Bryce Christensen, the Chief Executive Officer and founder of BryceTech companies in the United States and the United Kingdom. With a wealth of expertise in the satellite and space industry, she's an internationally recognized expert, known for her rigorous analysis and innovative data-driven strategy. Carissa co-chairs the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Space, chairs the U.S. Board of the United Nations affiliated Space Generation Advisory Council, and serves on various other important boards and committees. I'm honored to have her with us today.
Really look forward to it.
Buckle up and let's go. So you are sitting on a pile of very valuable information, is that right?
Well, BryceTech is an analytics and engineering company. We and I are big believers in the value of evidence-based analysis and forecasting to support good decision-making. And particularly in the area of the economics of the space industry, for many years, there were very limited data sets. And so in order to do the kind of work I wanted to do, my teams started building those data sets. So we do have quite a number of databases on space activity and modeling tools to help us predict outcomes, and a huge repository of insights that we have gained over the years. And we try to bring that to bear on the relevant questions of business and policy and technology and investment today.
Wonderful. Shall we take a look at 2023 and then maybe a little beyond?
The space industry, I often like to make the analogy when we talk about the space industry to imagine if we're talking about, let's talk about the ocean industry. And of course, that could mean snorkeling, or that could mean oil rigs, or that could mean cargo transportation. Right. So it's a very diverse set of industries. And certainly space also is a diverse set of industries. So I think it's interesting to parse that a bit. To me, there's a very useful top level distinction to be made between what I think we can call the satellite value chain, all of the aspects of producing, manufacturing, and deploying and operating and selling the services associated with satellites. And then the other category, I think, that encompasses, between those two, I think they encompass all space activities, is in-space activities, exploration and science and in-orbit manufacturing and so on. And those two broad categories are both linked, of course, by launch. And the interesting thing is that those two very broad categories have very different characteristics. The satellite value chain generally is more mature, more commercially viable, more global. The in-space activities are still more supported by government agencies, less commercially mature. In terms of growing markets, there's a great deal of interest, but they're much more nascent. And so I think it's interesting to talk about those two categories. We can, of course, break space down into hundreds of subsectors, but at that top level, what's coming up I think varies. So thinking about the satellite value chain, what we're seeing in 2023, the big question that I think the community hopes to get an answer to, or at least the beginnings of an answer to, is around the viability of massive, small satellite, low Earth orbit constellations from a business standpoint. SpaceX is deploying Starlink, OneWeb, Kuiper, Telesat, others that are in development, including some national systems. Those constellations have driven investment, have driven launch rates, have driven attention and policy around space. And it's a very big question. How are those businesses actually going to look? Where are their customers going to come from? Are they going to find the customers they seek? Will the quality of service be competitive with terrestrial alternatives? Will the price point be attractive? What does that business outlook hold? And we won't get a complete answer in 2023, but I think we'll get some indications that will be very interesting.
Do you think this is the end of terrestrial telecommunication providers and that new kids are coming to the table? Or are terrestrial providers now gearing up to go into orbit with their services?
So I absolutely do not think this is in any way the end of terrestrial communication providers or terrestrial communication technology. Space-based systems are not dominantly better than terrestrial alternatives in many respects, ranging from susceptibility to atmospheric interference, or rain attenuation, for example, to the speed and quality of service, to the cost of deploying service. So terrestrial systems, I think, will continue to have an advantage locally and regionally. The space constellations are interesting from the point of view of providing global services, serving underserved populations where it's too expensive or logistically difficult to build out terrestrial options. So I think that in the most successful case for LEO constellations, they will integrate with terrestrial systems and operate side by side with terrestrial providers, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating, but I don't envision them as dominating.
Are we running the risk of congestion in space? Of course, we're talking about space traffic management, but this is maybe building up or serving as a major business opportunity right now for many players to bring their own constellations up into low Earth orbit. How do you see that?
Certainly, there's already, but there are already difficulties associated with human-created objects, debris in orbit. You'll hear about the space station having to move out of the way of something. Satellite operators deal with this continuously, having to be aware of where there may be threatening debris. Large constellations that are deploying hundreds and thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit certainly create risks. Simply the challenge of managing those satellites when they're operational and healthy is significant. And then the debris risk is associated with potentially the failure of a satellite and further the failure of its planned mechanism, whatever that may be, for deorbiting. That to me, it's certainly an area of consideration and concern. That to me is a problem that is solvable by effective regulation. And I think that there are in every country that relies on space, and that's most countries in the world, there's on the satellite side, there certainly are pockets of awareness and attention to this issue. I don't know that we've got to the point of concerted global regulatory action that everyone is confident will be effective. Countries are sort of grappling with, how do we do this? Who does it? Who do we cooperate with? What does our structure look like? What should our rules be? How do we balance rules for preventing debris with our desire for economic development and the gains that we can achieve through on-orbit systems? So I think it's a problem. I think it's an attended to problem. I don't think it's a solved problem.
Is it solvable? Especially when it comes to consensus building.
So I'll point to air traffic management. And is that a globally solved problem? We can certainly point to airports where there are signs that say, where the FAA would say, we're concerned about the safety of that airport. We can point to conflicts among countries. But overall, the global air traffic system works pretty well. There's a massive amount of very safe traffic. So I am optimistic from a regulatory standpoint that the problem is solvable. The bigger problem of debris, of course, there are two parts to it. One is regulating the behavior and ensuring appropriate behavior of new constellations that are deployed to ensure that they are not unduly polluting the environment. We'll never achieve perfection, but we can certainly manage that effectively. There also, of course, is debris that exists from our previous decades of in-space activities, whether that's discarded rocket bodies or the results of failed satellites or a number of anti-satellite tests. And that creates a different problem where there's not a clear regulatory pathway to say you may not launch without achieving these goals. It's already there. It's a very traditional, typical pollution problem. And that's going to take, in my view, national leadership. Countries are going to have to, I think it's got to be at the national level, step up and step in and assign resources to addressing that problem as well.
So let's try to extend our focus a little, and from this year to maybe 5 years, 10 years, where do you see? I'm hesitant to say the space industry right now because you were rightly directing me in the right direction that there is no such thing as the space industry. So I should make myself a little clearer, maybe. The ocean of space engagement, maybe. So where are you seeing all this headed? Is there a clear direction that you're seeing? Because right now it's Leo, maybe the moon next door, but where are we going?
So thinking about the medium term, let's say that 5-year period. So again, I talked about the satellite value chain and other in orbit activities. Satellite systems will continue to deploy. We'll be watching for their business outcomes. If a satellite system, that particularly a large LEO constellation, deploys, struggles to close its business case, then we'll look for what that, how that plays out. Does another provider come in and acquire it? Does the government step in and get involved with that asset? I think that's very much a business case, mergers and acquisitions kind of pathway that we'll be paying attention to on the satellite side. On the other activity side, exploration and science and manufacturing in space, that's the next 5 years is potentially extremely interesting because we've seen government budgets increase globally for space. And we've seen in the U.S. And more broadly, international space station partners focus attention on the increase in commercial activities in low Earth orbit separate from satellites. So NASA, of course, is envisioning and actively involved in supporting a post-International Space Station future shaped by multiple commercial providers. And with NASA as a customer, perhaps their anchor customer, but the vision goes not by any means the only customer. There is significant investment in planetary exploration, both robotic and human. And again, the NASA Artemis program, which has a global footprint and many international partners, is targeting a return to the moon. So there's a very dynamic commercial ecosystem around that government expenditure, partly by policy. Government agencies are seeking to work with commercial providers in a way that's a bit different from a traditional, the government says, build me X and it should look exactly like this. To the government agencies are seeking to leverage commercial innovation and commercial investment and structure contracts differently. So, and also government agencies are spending a lot of money, and that creates business opportunities. So on the in-space activity side, I think the next 5 years is going to be one of seeing where the weight and the bulk of commercial interest and activity lands. Is it in biomanufacturing on ISS or and potentially on a commercial station? Is it commercial human spaceflight and an expansion of tourism? Is it robotic exploration by countries and space agencies that have historically not been leaders in space exploration? How does that play out and evolve?
You mentioned the International Space Station. Do you think that the International Space Station that is orbiting the Earth right now is the last International Space Station of that kind?
What a great question. I certainly don't think the International Space Station is the last major international space project. As you push the boundaries of space activity and take on new challenges, there is a high degree of risk, and you need a lot of capital, and often there's not a clear business model associated with pushing those boundaries. So in order to push those boundaries, you need international cooperation. So will that be an international lunar base? Will that be something beyond that? I don't. I would hesitate to predict what that will be, but I certainly think that the space station model has been fairly successful from an international point of view. And again, there are a million challenges that we can point to, a million friction points between partners and programmatic difficulties. But overall, it's an extraordinary accomplishment. Through international cooperation, nations of the world have created a situation in which humans have lived off the Earth for the last 20 years. That to me is more than 20 years. That to me is an extraordinary success.
Absolutely. Carissa, you have, with your company, you have vast insight in everything that is going on up there or will be going on up there anytime soon. Do you see any commercial projects we may not have heard of, like recreational projects, maybe even on the horizon? Are there any plans for something that's not so reported on, maybe, like in the commercial sphere, the space tourism and whatnot?
So I think the answer to that is inevitably yes, because of the extremely high level of commercial activity, of investment interest, and of business innovation. Again, what that looks like is, I could speculate. I certainly can't talk about any stealth projects because I'd be an awfully bad consultant if I did that. To me, one of the interesting areas, so we hear a lot about commercial human spaceflight and human tourism, and I think there's a very substantial amount of interest in that. We've done a number of surveys and studies to evaluate the interest of people who can afford such activities, and today and broader communities in the future when prices come down, there's substantial interest. To me, one of the really interesting recreational aspects is the potential for robotic applications, whether that is, steering a vehicle around the moon or looking at what's going on in space. There's, of course, the VR experience that you can have right now walking around on the space station. So I think that will certainly be a growth area.
By steering a vehicle around the moon, you mean like from Earth, from my Xbox remote control or PlayStation, or is that what you're referring to? That's
exactly the kind of idea.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the launchers. Three names have been dominating the launcher sector for years now. Of course, we're talking about Elon and Jeff Bezos and Virgin Galactic, of course. So the question is are they the only ones? Of course, we know that there's other launchers out there, smaller companies, especially in Europe also. But is there a true contender to SpaceX on the horizon out there? Or will they be the ones for the next years to come?
So I think that you are absolutely correct that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson have dominated the media discussion of launch. If we pull back a little bit and look at who conducts launches, if we look at uncrewed launches, so no humans, just typically satellites, they're the French company Arianespace has a substantial market share. The U.S. company, which is a joint venture between Lockheed Martin and Boeing, United Launch Alliance, has a substantial share, particularly for U.S. government payloads. And SpaceX absolutely has a very substantial global share. I think it's fair to say that SpaceX is the dominant global launch provider at the moment. A number of Chinese launch companies are also significant participants in the market, although less present as global competitors. So there's a long-standing launch industry focused on satellites where, again, SpaceX has been a successful disruptor and captured a significant amount of market share, but is by no means the only provider. One interesting note there is that part of the market share SpaceX has captured used to belong to Russian launch providers, which were relatively low cost and I think often viewed as slightly less reliable, but attractive options. And for a variety of reasons, including some performance problems, SpaceX has been able to capture a very substantial proportion of that market share. So then let's look at about a human spaceflight. That really has changed dramatically. So we saw the end of the shuttle program in the U.S. U.S. astronauts for a decade traveled on Russian launchers to get it back and forth from the International Space Station. The commercial crew program, through the commercial crew program, SpaceX now carries humans to and from the space station. And that really is a dramatic change to the launch world. To have a commercial provider conducting those launches. And we've seen that expand now to commercial human missions. We had the Inspiration 4 mission. We had the Axiom 1 mission, where Axiom, which is one of the potential future commercial space stations, where that company put together a mission that flew on a SpaceX vehicle to the International Space Station with a crew of 3 passengers and a professional astronaut as the commander. So there, in commercial human spaceflight to orbit, SpaceX absolutely has become the dominant player there. With regard to suborbital commercial human spaceflight, suborbital tourism flights, they're the 2 companies that are really shaping that market are Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson, and Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos. Both of those companies have conducted launches. Virgin still in a test mode. Blue has moved to an operational mode. And that is really quite extraordinary that Blue has conducted a number of launches with 4 to multiple people on each capsule. Their capacity is 6. I think most of their flights have had 4. Some have had more. That's quite amazing that you can write a check and go to space in relatively short order. Virgin has been selling tickets for that experience for more than a decade at a price of something like $250,000 US. It's varied at times. Blue Origin, let's cut that.
Yeah.
Blue Origin has not published a price. They've announced some information that there was an auction for the first flight of New Shepard that flew in the where the auction ended in tens of millions. But the price point I think that the market will eventually get to is a much more accessible price, something closer to the price that the Virgin sales have targeted for many years. And so that's quite a change, because to fly to the space station is probably a $50 million transaction. That's quite a difference from a few million or even a few hundred thousand.
If I had some pocket money to spend or talent to invest, where should I place my bets in this ocean of a space industry?
I think that if you're looking for a highly reliable return on investment, we would use the gold rush model and say, don't go out and try to mine gold. Build things that the miners need. So, the pickaxes and the pans and the hotels and the transportation across the continent and so on. Absolutely, saloons. Saloons in space. You heard it here first. We've defined the big new business area.
Absolutely. Let's start after this. Yeah. Okay.
Infrastructure, elements of the supply chain. As you look at space supply chains nationally and globally, you'll find areas where there's a single supplier, or areas where there's a long-standing supplier that is very costly because either because it's operating as a monopoly, or because it is operating to an extremely high standard of precision, with a great deal of test and tracking that was perhaps required by a military client, and is not necessarily needed by a commercial provider. So I think that looking for gaps and weaknesses and competitive opportunities at lower tiers in the supply chain would be where I would first invest. Less glamorous, but probably a bit more reliable from a business case standpoint.
Carissa, I think especially in the Western world, we are witnessing a major shift in the way we work, in the workforce, how it is set up, the kind of work we do, especially also in the wake of artificial intelligence. So considering that major, I shouldn't say turmoil, but maybe shift we're undergoing, how can I find out if the space industry needs the expertise I have right now in my job down here on Earth? So how would I find out what kind of expertise is needed?
The first answer that's a marvelous question. And the first point I would raise there is to say, no matter what your skill set, it is highly likely that there is a job in the space industry that maps to it. The space industry, the suite of space industries, like any other suite of industries, in addition to the core product that is produced, requires financial, legal, communications expertise. So many disciplines are relevant to the industry. For example, BryceTech has on our staff a very gifted space artist, which is really important for us in helping to communicate some of the concepts that we want to communicate. What's really interesting around so the nature of core space technology certainly expands beyond aerospace engineers to materials science, to coding and software and compute expertise of every variety, to analytics and machine learning and robotics and autonomy, sort of as a suite. And then beyond that, the huge surge of investment that we've seen, and of course, the industry needs people who understand investing and investment and investment processes. The huge surge of investment that we've seen, the hundreds of startups that we've seen in the last less than a decade, are innovating, and that innovation is going to create further demand for new skill sets. For example, applying 3D printing to large space systems, to rockets, for example, which is certainly happening, raises the question of completely redesigning some of those vehicles. So many designs of everything that we deal with day to day were shaped by the limits of manufacturing technology. And so there's a model where you can use additive manufacturing to build improved versions that look similar to what we're used to for engineered systems. And then there's the model that says, let's entirely reimagine what this system looks like. Maybe we don't need separate valves. Maybe that's integrated. And so I think there's such potential for new jobs associated with space businesses. And then once you've got that extraordinary new item, the world does not work in such a way where you simply hold it up like the Lion King and everyone flocks to it and says, this is the best thing ever. You need to understand, develop a strategy for inserting that into the marketplace, getting potential customers and users to be comfortable with that, thinking about the broader systems that interact with that component or element and how they need to change. And so there are negotiations, and there are persuasive campaigns, and there is a defining strategy. And this is why I say it's hard for me to think of a skill set or a job that doesn't have an analog in this broad set of space industries. If you want to work in space, I think there's a place for you. Now, the thing about space, which I have been so greatly appreciative of from my career in the industry, is it tends to attract people who are very passionate about what they do. So maybe there's a little more competition than there might be in another field. Sure. But the upside of that is that when you spend your working life with people who care deeply about what they're doing, that's a gift.
That's a gift. That's even more interesting than a huge paycheck. I think, to be super honest. Are you passionate about the space industry, about space?
I am, in a way that's perhaps a bit orthogonal to some others. I am not specifically passionate about any particular program or architecture. I am passionate about the potential of space to advance humanity, to help us solve problems in so many ways. It's such a unique environment that drives interdisciplinary problem solving around very unique problems, which results in technologies and capabilities that we would not otherwise have, that have spin-off benefits on Earth. It is, to me, at the core of the human spirit, exploration and doing things that are hard for the sake of knowing that you can do them. To me, that's fundamentally human, and I think that that's fundamentally connected to space. And I am also very passionate professionally about analysis, about rigor, about bringing an objective viewpoint that helps people make good decisions to improve engineering, to improve outcome, to improve policies. I'm such a believer in trying to figure out the right answer without a preconceived expectation and bring that insight forward to drive us in the right direction. And it's been a great source of satisfaction, when I and we as a company have been able to help clients and policymakers achieve goals that they're trying to achieve by mining, by digging out what's really going on and helping them understand that.
What is it that we're doing here as humanity? What kind of moment in history is this right now? Are we growing up and extending our home upward? What is it? What is going on here?
I think globally, across all technology-driven disciplines, we have been learning what it means to play with fire. We've burnt ourselves a few times. There's always a risk when you play with fire, but there's an incredible opportunity. And so to me, I would like to think that humanity is at the point where we are growing into understanding how to use fire responsibly, to use technology responsibly, and extract the benefit without an undue cost. That's what we all hope for at this moment in our global history.
I would so much love to subscribe to all this to make this positive vision become a reality, because this would also mean that we are at the brink of making an evolutionary leap as a society, because I sometimes feel we are still cavemen and women down here on Earth in a very primitive state of mind when it comes to sharing resources and dealing with one another. So that would be a major leap that you're picturing here for all of us.
I believe in learning. I believe that individuals have the potential to learn. I believe that communities have the potential to learn. I believe that societies have the potential to learn. And I think with learning comes a better future.
That's something. That's a good note to end this discussion. Carissa, we do have two fun questions. I keep repeating. Now it's episode 74, by the way, for this podcast. And I've been asking this question each of my guests. And the first question is for your upcoming space journey. If you're invited in going to a distant planet, maybe as a tourist. So I could imagine if you do this, it's going to be a very long and boring journey because it's a vast stretch wherever you want to go. What kind of music would you bring along? Because we have a Spotify playlist for the future space traveler. And you're now asked to provide one tune you wouldn't want to miss on that travel, on that journey.
Oh, I'm going to cheat a bit. And I'm going to say I would bring the cast album of the musical Groundhog Day by Tim Minchin, which is about learning and transformation and the challenges of repetition and a long, boring time, and the rewards you get at the end of that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And question number 2, this is the Space Café Podcast. It's a coffee place. And in coffee places, you now and then energize yourself with an espresso. Now, I would like to challenge you to share an espresso for the mind with us, with me, with the audience. What kind of inspiration would you like to share with me that could help energize our audiences and myself? And you can pick whatever kind of topic you want to pick.
I would go with a very fundamental book, Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I think speaks to the point that you were making, that humanity is humanity, and we still operate as we always have in some ways. One of the points of that very impactful and brilliant book is that science is not a linear progression. Human learning is not a linear progression. We have periods where we reject new knowledge because it doesn't fit into our understanding of the world. It doesn't fit into the paradigm in which we operate until, for whatever reason, that paradigm is disrupted and we can see the new evidence and we can move our understanding forward. And again, I guess it's something of the same theme, that a lack of linear progress and periods of frustrating repetition and that sense of beating your head against a wall and not making progress, that is not inconsistent with progress. That is part of the human journey toward knowledge and growth and improvement.
It's a spiral movement, if I remember, right? Thomas Kuhn's movement. It's Absolutely. An upward spiral. That's very uplifting. Wonderful. Carissa Christensen, thank you so much for taking the time. It was uplifting, inspiring, and I know where I'm placing my bets now.
This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you're seeking in-depth insights and perspectives from the dynamic space industry, I'd like to introduce you to a new addition to the SpaceWatch.Global family. Introducing Space Economy Insights, a podcast by SpaceWatch.Global that explores the most pressing questions and emerging trends in the space industry. Your hosts, Kevin O'Connell and Emma Gatti, are experts in the field and eager to delve into topics such as the growth of new market segments in the space industry, the importance of inclusivity in the industry, and the interplay between space security and commerce. Tune in for thought-provoking discussions and exclusive access to the world of space. Thanks, my friends, for tuning in every other week to the Space Café Podcast. You're making me happy. Very happy. Indeed. Bye-bye. Until next time.